I need to update the pagination result to also contain a list of links. So let me add that property right under the total count. I'll add a list of link DTOs. Let's call it links, and I'll give it a getter and a setter accessor so that I can actually update the links. You may want to consider extracting this into some common interface, like I did with the iCollection response. This could, for example, be a simple interface that I could call iLinks response, and it would have a list of link DTO. We would call it links, and let's say we have a get and a set accessor. Let me move this into its own file, and all I would need to do is to just implement this interface inside of my type. The pagination result already supports this, so everything is fine. And for example, I could add it on my habit DTO, so let me add the iLinks response. So let's now close this down, as we won't need it any longer, and let's see how to introduce hypermedia links inside of our pagination result. I'll go back to my controller, and I want to create a similar method to what we did here. So let's go to this method, which is called createLinksForHabit, and I'll create another method that returns a list of link DTOs, and let's call it createLinksForHabits. We'll think through what are the arguments that we are going to need here, but let's see how we would implement this. So I'll get my list of link DTOs and create a variable that I can initialize to an empty collection. And now let's consider which links we want to include here. So these links are referencing our top level resource. So if I wanted to include a self-referencing link, then I would need to reference the getHabits endpoint instead of the endpoint for fetching a single habit. This is a get endpoint, and it has quite a bit of arguments. And in our case, we are in luck because we encapsulated those arguments inside of a DTO. So I can specify the habits query parameters, and let me pass in the parameters. And now I just need to specify the parameters one by one. So let me move this into a new row, and then let's see what we have. We have the page, and I can specify the parameters page value. Then we have the page size, and I'll specify parameters page size. We also have the fields, so I can say parameters fields. Then we have our search term. I'll say parameters search. We have our sort argument. We have our type, which I can also pass from the parameters, and we have the habit status. So let's say this is enough for now. Now I just need to call this method and include it in my links. So let's say after I create my pagination result, I call createLinksForHabits, and I pass in the habit query parameters. Let's go ahead and start the application and test this out. This is the request I want to send to my API, and it includes all of the query parameters that we are supporting. The search term, the type status, sort query parameter, the data shaping fields, the page, and the page size. And if I send this request, we will get back a response, and if we take a look at the response, but specifically the hypermedia links that we get back, you will notice that we have this one link. It's a self-referencing link to get the same resource. Now, if I try and send this request, I should get back the same response, right? Well, it might seem like it, but this response contains 2 habits, and our original response only contains 1. So what gives? There's actually a very subtle bug here that can easily creep into your code base. Let me show you what it is. When I was constructing my hypermedia link, I specified the wrong name for my query parameter here. I should have used just Q, which is how we are exposing this query parameter on our API, but instead I used the property name. So something like this can be problematic because it's your responsibility to specify the correct values here. Now, while we're here, what are some other links that could be useful here? For example, I may want to have a link for creating a new resource. This could be my create habit endpoint. Let's call it create. The HTTP method is post, and there aren't any route parameters. So this is enough to include my link. Now, what about pagination? It could be useful to include the next or previous page links. So let me add 2 more parameters here. Let's call it has next page and has previous page. I'm going to align this vertically so that we can see everything nicely. And then what we want to do is if we have a next page, then I want to include another link. I'm going to copy what I have here, and I will say links add and initialize my new link. Because this is the next page, we should increment the page in the response by 1. Conversely, if we want to include the previous page, then I can say if has previous page. I can copy what I had here with the difference that the previous page should have the page value reduced by 1. Now obviously the names of these links aren't correct, so this will be the next page and this will be the previous page, but we're still retaining all of the query parameters that were part of the original request. We need to go back to our endpoint and pass in the missing parameters, and these are available on the pagination result. So I need to pass in the next page and the previous page properties to be able to construct my hypermedia links. And while we are here, let's go to this helper method, creating the links for the habit. And I want to include one more hypermedia link. The rel value will be upsert tags, and the name of the endpoint I want to use here is from the habit tags controller. We have the upsert habit tags endpoint. Now, in order for this to work, I need to make a few more adjustments. This is a put endpoint, so I will update that. The identifier of the habit has a name of habit ID. You can confirm this if you go to the controller and take a look at the name of the route parameter. But one more thing I found that's necessary to do is to include the name of the controller. It would be great if you could use the name of operator and specify the controller. Unfortunately, this isn't how the runtime sees the name of the controller. Instead, it omits the controller suffix. So the proper name of the controller is just habit tags. We could hard code this. For example, I can have a constant here. Let's say public constant string name, and I can have habit tags. If you don't want to hard code this, you can make this into a public static read-only field, and then you can say name of habit tags controller, and you should be able to call the replace method and replace the value of controller with an empty string. I prefer using string empty for empty strings, and then I can go back to my habits controller and I can say habit tags controller and specify the name of the controller. Of course, we're just jumping through some hoops here to make this work, but it is what it is. Now let's start the application and test all of this out. Here's the request that I'll send to our REST API. It's only going to include the fields that I want to get back as part of my habit resource. I will fetch the first page and I will set the page size to 2. If we send this request, we will get back our response. And let's first examine the links collection for our single resource. We have the self-referencing link, the link for updating, partially updating, and deleting a resource. And we also have a link that lets us know how we can upsert the tags for a given habit. You can see that the URI is properly constructed. The habit ID is part of the route, and we also have tags as part of the route where we can send a put request and update the habits tags. We could also include another hypermedia link here that could be a get endpoint for retrieving these habits. But what's more interesting in this response is the links collection on our collection response. Notice that we have our self-referencing link, the link for creating a new resource. This is how your clients can discover how they can create a new resource and add it as part of the collection. And we also have our pagination link. If I navigate to this link, I will be able to get the next page of habits. So let's go ahead and do that. I'll send this request now, and if I collapse the items and we take a look at the links that we get back in the response, you will notice that there is now an additional link. Apart from the self-referencing, the create link, and the next page link, there is also the previous page link. We are on the second page, so it now makes sense to include the link to the previous page. We also have a link to our next page, which is page 3. So let me go to page 3 and send this request. We'll get back a response. There is still a next page link. Let's go ahead and send another request and observe the links in the response. There is still a next page link. Let's go ahead and send that request. And if I keep going, eventually I will reach the last page and the hypermedia links will no longer include a link to the next page. In hindsight, I should have used a larger page size to make this demonstration simpler, but because I have 17 records in my responses, I have to go through a couple of more of these links, and eventually I will get to the last page of my resources, and finally my links response doesn't contain the next page because there is no next page. In this example, there is only the self-referencing, the create link, and the previous page link. And what's really awesome here is that your client applications now don't need to worry at all about creating the next and the previous page links. They can just use the values that they get back in the hypermedia links. So let's do a quick recap of what we covered as part of this lesson. We started by supporting hypermedia links for a single resource. We implemented this in a helper method, and we're using the abstractions that we have available for getting back a fully qualified URL for a given endpoint. For a single habit, these are the links that we want to include in the response, and we could include many more as we evolve our API. For our collection response, we're including the self-referencing link, the link for how to create a new resource, and then we're including the pagination links pointing to the next or the previous page of resources. However, all of these hypermedia links, even though they're very useful, also have a downside, and that is that they significantly increase the size of our API responses. So it could be useful if your API clients are able to decide if the response should include hypermedia links or not. And this is something that we are going to discuss as part of our next lesson, where I'm going to introduce you to the concept of content negotiation. You'll see what content negotiation is, what are some of the interesting features that we have available in ASP.NET Core for working with content negotiation, and also how to create your custom media types.